We begin with our brand new ABC News Washington Post poll. The president's approval rating at 44%. That's a career high in our poll. And yet, 53% disapprove of his performance, making President Trump the only president in modern history to have majority disapproval ratings for his first 2.5 years in office. And just 40% of Americans approve of how he's handling his signature issue, immigration. The numbers there falling sharply along partisan lines. The overwhelming majority of Americans agree immigration as a whole will factor heavily into their 2020 vote. And of course, the backdrop, the growing evidence of a humanitarian crisis on the southern border. That New York Times article, drawing from interviews with current and former Border Patrol agents, detailing outbreaks of scabies, shingles, and chickenpox spreading among the hundreds of children who were being held in cramped cells in a detention center in Clint, Texas. This comes just days after a government report also showed images of overcrowding in some detention centers. That report alleging many children were being denied regular access to showers or a change of clothes. This Independence Day weekend, these allegations have ignited a debate about American values and how people in government custody can and should be treated. President Trump is defending the handling of those detention centers, and the man he put in charge has too. And Acting Secretary of Homeland Security Kevin McAleenan joins us now. We really appreciate you being here this morning. I know you have been concerned for months about the growing humanitarian crisis. You said it to us about 6 months ago on the show. Right. But I want to begin with that IG report, your own IG report. We saw those disturbing images of the migrants in some of those border facilities and read from the report about overcrowding and unsanitary conditions. This from the report itself as well. 31% of the children at these facilities had been held longer than 72 hours, generally permitted under legal standards. Children at 3 of the 5 Border Patrol facilities had no access to showers. Single adults at one facility, some were held in standing room only conditions for a week, and at another more than a month in overcrowded cells. And although standards require CBP to make a reasonable effort to provide a shower for adults after 72 hours, most single adults had not had a shower in CBP custody, despite several being held, again, for as long as a month. When you read that, when you look at those images, what's your explanation?
My explanation is that it's an extraordinarily challenging situation. That since I saw you on December 30th, we've had over 500,000 people cross our southern border. The predominant crossings are made by family units, unaccompanied children, and then single adults. The dates you referenced, the first IG report was on May 10th. On May 11th, I had a press conference at the border talking about our overflowing facilities and the challenging conditions in them. The second IG report was June 10th. On June 11th, I testified in front of Congress talking about the challenges in our facilities and that we needed action on the supplemental so we could provide a better situation. On that night of June 10th, I went on Chris Cuomo and said, no American should be comfortable with the conditions in our facilities. So we've been talking about this. We've been asking for help, and we've been identifying the solutions.
Shouldn't the whole of government been involved in this? What was the actual plan to deal with this? You've been talking about it all these months, but still you have this. And I want to read from the New York Times report as well. New York Times, El Paso Times have the report from the Clint facility in El Paso. They say it's based on dozens of interviews with current and former Border Patrol agents, as well as detainees, lawyers, some sworn statements. I read the portion earlier about diseases. The report goes on to say the stench of the children's dirty clothing was so strong it spread to the agents' own clothing. People in town would scrunch their noses when they left work. The children cried constantly. One girl seemed like likely enough to kill herself, that the agents made her sleep on a cot in front of them. The reports say agents were heartbroken seeing this. So back to this. Why couldn't you do more? Why couldn't the whole of government come together? You knew there was a crisis.
Right. So we've done a tremendous amount. Since December 30th, when we last talked about this, we had 20 medical providers in our facilities, border-wide. Now we have over 200. We had the U.S. Coast Guard come in and support us with their medical corps. We had the Public Health Service Commission Corps. We have pediatricians in Border Patrol stations for the first time in history trying to help address conditions where children are coming across, 300 a day in those months, in April and May. One. Two, we've built soft-sided temporary facilities. These are spaces that are much more appropriate, high ceilings, more room for children and families. We've put them both in Donna, Texas, in South Texas, as well as in El Paso to provide additional space. We did all this without the funding, hoping that we would get a supplemental to get ahead of the status. We've bought buses to transport people to better places.
You talk about this press conference last week. You spoke about the Clint facility after an earlier AP report described inadequate food, water, and sanitation. Here's what you said about the allegations at Clint.
Unsubstantiated allegations last week regarding a single Border Patrol facility in Clint Station in Texas created a sensation. That's balanced somewhat since several media outlets toured the Clint Station and saw the actual conditions there, a clean and well-managed facility and well-equipped process.
The New York Times report is talking specifically about the Clint
Right.
facility. Why did you call those allegations unsubstantiated?
Because there's adequate food and water, because the facility is cleaned every day, because I know what our standards are, and I know they're being followed because we have tremendous levels of oversight, five levels of oversight.
You don't believe the New York Times report?
So you're asking...
The stench of the children's dirty clothing was so strong it spread to the agent. They had scabies, chicken pox. Why did you say unsubstantiated?
You just referenced three things that were unsubstantiated: inadequate food, inadequate water, and unclean cells. None of those have been substantiated. What I have is an Office of Professional Responsibility, an independent office that oversees our operations report, who went to Clint Station in the same time period. We have the juvenile
Do you still think
coordinator.
they're unsubstantiated, given the New York Times and the El Paso Times report, these specific allegations?
So I don't know which specific allegations you're referencing, but let's be very clear.
The ones I
Martha.
just read.
This is an extraordinarily challenging situation. We had an overflow situation with hundreds of children crossing every day. That's why we were asking for funding for Health and Human Services to provide adequate bed space so those children could be moved from that immediate border processing into a more appropriate setting for children. So I'm not denying that there are challenging situations at the border. I've been the one talking about it the most. What I can tell you right now is that there's adequate food, water, and that the reason those children were at Clint Station in the first place is so they could have medical consolidated. They had shower facilities for over a year. There's been showers there. So this is why we tried to provide a better situation for the brief time they're supposed to spend.
The New York Times says that the
border.
agency's leadership knew for months that some children had no beds to sleep on, no way to clean themselves, and sometimes went hungry. Its own agents had raised the alarm, according to the story.
Okay, we have no evidence.
Did you know anything?
We have no evidence that children went hungry, first of all. Police station cells are not a good place for children, as I've said.
Had
dozens
agents
of
raised
times
alarms
publicly.
that you had heard about?
Of course we're worried about it. Everyone in the entire chain of command was worried about the situation for children. That's why we've built soft-sided facilities, 1,000 spaces already. We're building more that are going to be opening next week. We're trying to provide as much space and as much nice a setting as we possibly can while children are in our custody. But the big point was to move them to HHS. Let me give you an update on that. On June 1st, we had 2,500 children in our custody. 1,200 had been with us over 3 days. Now that we have the supplemental from Congress, HHS has additional beds. We only have 350 as of yesterday afternoon's report, and only 20 of those children had been with us more than 3 days. So that's a huge improvement based on the resources we asked for from Congress and were finally given.
Should the president have used his authorities pursuant to the declared national emergency to redirect funds to address the conditions at the border more quickly?
So the declared national emergency did not apply to this scenario. This was a matter, and we had already taken action as soon as we could at the border to provide additional medical care, additional transportation, additional facilities within our existing funding. We were going to have to reprogram it from other Homeland Security priorities. But we did that. And now that Congress has finally come through with the funding, we're able to apply it expeditiously because those contracts are in place and underway.
Let's turn to the private Facebook groups with offensive content. We can't show most of it because it is so bad. It is allegedly associated with CBP agents. You have said the agency is going to look into that. ABC and others have reported that CBP leadership was aware of at least one group as far back as February 2018. You've served as acting commissioner since January 2017. Were you aware of this so-called 1015 group?
I was not aware of this group.
Do you know if your leadership was?
So I've been made aware that we had an allegation in 2016 that was investigated, followed up on, and that discipline was meted out on an agent that made an offensive post on that website.
Why wasn't the website shut down? Why wasn't that Facebook page shut down? Should it have been?
So CBP does not control this Facebook page. This is a group of individuals on their off-duty
Did the word go
time.
out to other agents? Or
So
just that
actually, we did
particular?
put out a policy on being careful on social media, the responsibility to maintain your standards and comply with the code of conduct, even in your private life, even in your personal views. But what I can tell you about this set of posts, as soon as they came to light, I directed an immediate investigation. It had already been reported to our Inspector General. They were already looking into it. We've already put several agents on administrative duties. We've issued cease and desist letters to more, and this investigation is continuing, and the agents will be held accountable if they're CBP employees who did inappropriate things. I don't think it's reflective of the men and women we have.
And I want to
our
move
uniform.
quickly to the ICE raids. The president said ICE raids that he delayed 2 weeks ago are going to be starting soon. When it was first made public, did you support the president moving forward with these new raids, and do you now?
So a balanced enforcement process has to involve interior enforcement. You can't do this all at the border. That's why I've been going down to Central America to work on the origins of this crisis and address this human smugglers that are incentivizing and inviting people into this dangerous cycle in the first place. That's why we're enhancing our border security. That's why I've asked for Congress to change the laws, but it's also why we need to do interior enforcement. We have situations where we have criminals, fugitives, and people with final orders of removal from an immigration judge. ICE needs to be out there enforcing their authorities.
And just one final question. It's also been reported that some close Trump allies in the White House are pushing for your departure. You are still the acting DHS secretary.
Right.
Do you expect to be formally nominated? Do you want to be?
I'm focused on solving the problems that we're facing right now, addressing this humanitarian and security crisis at our border, and supporting the men and women. If I could just give you one last close on our men and women, Martha. I've had the privilege of working alongside the Border Patrol for 16 years. I've seen them in midnight patrols. I've seen them in situations where they've lost a fellow agent in the line of duty. These are some of the finest professionals and some of the best human beings that I know. And they do their job with heart. They do their job with honor. And we're not going to let a few people that don't represent the rest of the organization besmirch their reputation. We're going to keep doing our job to the best of our ability.
Thanks very much for joining us this morning,
Thank
sir.
you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.